So it's me again. You heard me for 2 hours this morning. What you didn't know is our hidden plan was to make you ontologists and experts on knowledge graph during today. And so you've seen practical examples. We tried to give you the vernacular about the ontology. I think you've seen also the usefulness of competency questions and so on, because it is one of the most practical methodology to start building knowledge graphs and ontologies that address the questions of Suzanne, which was very good. Can I add more? You can always add more, and that's the issue. Where do you start and where do you stop? So we have a daunting task in GRAPHIA, which is building the GRAPHIA ontology. That covers SSH. Damn, that's a lot of things to cover, right? So we need to start somewhere. And in order to actually design this ontology, we wanted to start with this practical approach and say, okay, let's be rational, let's be practical. And so that's what I'm going to present, and you're going to have to work and not listen. So it's different from the previous session where it was interactive and you have questions, but now you're going to have to work and think about competency questions you'd like to ask to your GRAPHIA knowledge graph, right? So we'll guide you. We have documentations. There is also another aspect we're going to discuss, but this is maybe for more, let's say, expert level people on ontology, is how do we design the ontology and start discussing laying out the design of the ontology. So the aim of GRAPHIA is to create a comprehensive social science and humanities knowledge graph that consolidate fragmented data into a single access point. So that's a very ambitious objective because GRAPHIA is a federation of multiple sources. So we have the use cases, we have the pilots. Each of them are working toward making their data into a graph or improving the graph that already exists. And the idea is that these graphs will be integrated into the GRAPHIA and SSH knowledge graph. And so in order to do that, as Julien was nicely explaining, you need a data model, an ontology. You need to structure the information because all these different graphs have been built by brilliant people in their own corner and they didn't talk with each other. Therefore, they are not using the same wording for the same concepts, right? And we had the discussions about what if I call that athletes instead of player? And so we are now looking into these kind of situations. What if someone names this another way, right? And so basically the idea is that we want to build the ontology to aggregate all this information, and that's the aim of task 2.1. Now, the question is, how do we build this GRAPHIA knowledge graph? And I've been thinking about it for a while. We had discussions, interesting discussions with Luca and so on. So for me, there are two different approaches. One is you do it the hard way. You go and harvest all the different knowledge graphs you have. You actually transform them so that they are aligned to the same ontology, right? And that's what I call the monolithic knowledge graph, and you put everything into a graph. And that's the open air approach, right? So they have a gigantic graph that just harvests and harvests tons of data sources, but that comes with some problems that I will explain later. The second option is we do have data sources that are run and managed by experts, and we want them to be independent. Not all of them will evolve and mature at the same time. They might change their ontology and so on. They might want to keep control on their data sources. So the GRAPHIA ontology and the knowledge graph should sort of be an aggregation of them. And as you've seen through the knowledge graph presentation, basically what you do is you traverse the graph. It's like a tree. So you take a branch and then you go to another and then another and then another until you reach the leaf you're looking for, right? And that's the second option, which is the interconnected graph. So that comes with pros and cons. If you do the monolithic knowledge graph, well, you get control and curation of the data, right? You harvest the data, you can transform it, denormalize it, disambiguate it. You can do a lot of things that you cannot do when it's in the database you don't control. And then you will have one core ontology for everyone. Like I was saying, an ontology for the rest of the world. Great. Although that comes with negative aspects. You need to get the communities to adopt that humongous ontology that covers the whole social science and humanities. And that is going to be really a lot of work, a lot of discussions, and so on. You will have a very complex and large ontology. So there are ways of designing this kind of things. You can modularize the ontology, use a top-level ontology to actually integrate them. But again, that means that you need to have ontology experts to work on the logic behind it. And what Julien hinted when he showed his tennis ontology with the relations, are they bidirectional? And then I have one tournament per year, how do I model that, and so on. That means you need to put your fingers into logic. Logic is based on mathematical framework, which is set theory. Therefore, you need to get into really complex details. And that is going to be taking a lot of resources that we didn't plan for in GRAPHIA, to be honest with you. It's going to be resource intensive. And there was the discussion about the data integration pipeline. And how do we do that? I mean, it's a huge amount of resource. You have to re-index, and it's becoming a technical nightmare because you need to make some tough choices because, well, it's going to be costly if you just harvest and then transform and other things. And then, if you put everything into a graph, and I work closely with my colleagues at OpenAir, one of the situations is the operating cost of the knowledge graph. You need to have a proper infrastructure to run that. That's really expensive. You need guys to actually make sure that the graph is up and running 24/7, that you get enough compute power to answer all the queries, because that's also resource intensive. Sparkle query seems to be easy, but then on the back side, on the infrastructure side, it takes a toll, right? Because there are calculations that are being made, and if your graph is becoming big, traversing that graph is just going to be really, really resource expensive. The other approach is the interconnected knowledge graph. And the advantage is, you say, I have independent knowledge base with their own ontology, and what I want to do is come up with a lightweight ontology that comes on top that makes the links between these ontologies. The advantage of that is that once it's lightweight ontology, so you can start designing one very quickly, and you can start testing it on 2, 3, 4 graphs, and then you can even have a plan as a rollout, which means we start with 3 or 4, and that is our approach. And then we know that there is the IRIS, that knowledge base that wants to be integrated, so we can have a sort of a process to integrate more of these resources as the project progresses, right? It gives independence to the different communities. So you're free to update your graph, not update your graph. You don't have to rush to update your own ontology. Or if you have the resources to develop further your ontology, you can do, because the changes you need to make in the lightweight ontology are minor. So you can actually just quickly update the global ontology to connect to the things, which gives some leeway and freedom to the communities. And then you can even think that each of these communities will be connected to overarching lightweight ontology, but then you can start working also on the connections between 2 graphs together that are of interest for the community. And then you can start connecting the knowledge graphs together independently and just not having something which is just on the top. The cons is you have to maintain that lightweight ontology. So it's a mapping exercise. That's what we already discussed this morning. And again, it came up like, okay, it's athlete here, it's player. And then I changed my mind. The ontology moved from athlete to another term. How do I manage that? How do I know that I need to update my mapping so that it works in real time, right? Because at some point they will publish in production their new ontology. You have this thin layer on top, but you're not aware of that. So basically some of the queries you were able to answer, you cannot answer anymore. So you need to think about a process that says to the team that manage and maintain this lightweight ontology, dude, this one has changed, you need to revise your mappings and do it quick, otherwise you cannot do these queries. And you need to maintain the connections with the knowledge graphs. And so that's, I don't think there are pros and cons in both. One, it may be easier for us to start with, which would be the second option, to actually quickly achieve some results, in particular because the way we wrote the project, we need to deliver a first version of the ontology in December. And that's very close. So we can do some work and have a V01 that works and address some of competency questions. That's also why we use these competency questions, because we can easily write a report that explains the methodology, and we can quickly test on the graphs themselves because they have different Sparkle endpoints, and go through the Sparkle endpoints and then ask these transversal queries to different graphs to demonstrate the validity of our ontology, right? One thing that Julien didn't show is in Sparkle, you can query in the same Sparkle endpoint different other Sparkle endpoints, right? So your query can span different graphs into one just endpoint. So the purpose of this session is to develop this first version of the ontology. So make a decision. Do we go for this core ontology, which is fine, or should we go for the lightweight? Lightweight would be faster. We can still get some initial results by December in the other approach, but we need to really discuss, and that I think is the discussions we need to have among experts and the people managing the ontologies of the different knowledge graphs, so we can actually make an initial decisions. This doesn't mean that we cannot change during the course of the project. It's just we need to actually decide on one approach, stick with it, deliver, and then we can update. And then the second aspect of this session is to start working with the non-technical people. The communities, you have data, right? You want to ask questions to your data, to your database or future knowledge graph, if it doesn't exist yet. Now the question is, what would be the questions you would ask to your graph together with OpenCitation, for instance, and GoTRIPLE and others, right? So that is the exercise we would like to do today, so that we can start having this list of competency questions. We'll prioritize based on the initial approach that we selected a set of knowledge graph to target, and then we'll improve, and as we go, we take care of these competency questions through the list. Just go through the list and update the ontology accordingly. So, and we can also discuss the process for incremental update. That would be something that we could also discuss. So the idea is to have two working groups, an ontology group that discuss about, let's say, nitty-gritty details of the ontology, like should we create a namespace for the GRAPHIA ontology? What are the existing ontology that does something similar? How do we map the things and how do we integrate? Should we do an OWL file? Should we do it? I mean, these are things that, you know, if you're not an ontologist, it would be boring for you. The other group is more like, what do we want to have from that GRAPHIA SSH knowledge graph? So the questions you want to ask to that knowledge graph. And, you know, just project yourself in the future, thinking that graph exists, what do I want to do with it? So I'll start with very brief introduction, but Julien already said everything, so I will go through the slides very quickly. Because I don't need to explain what a competency question is anymore. And then I will just go into the initial target graph we identified. They are written down in the ground. So we said, okay, this is written down in the contract. These are the ones we start with. And then we can discuss about the process and which other graph we want to integrate in the working sessions. And then we can have the working session. So we have an Excel spreadsheet. So the remote participants can contribute to that. Maybe that could be an open discussions. You can start putting in for 10, 15, 30 minutes work on the competency questions. Then we have a break. We come back together and then we discuss your questions. Okay, I have this concern. I'm not sure if this is a valid competency questions, and we can look together so that we enrich ourselves and the knowledge of everyone at the same time. We use the linked open data approach. I mean, competency questions, scoping, and things. These are the first stages of the ontology. Again, because if you don't scope, you can end up with a tennis ontology that covers journalism and all these things, and that's not necessarily what you want to have for the start. And there is a lot of activities for the design of the ontology. So if you go and dive The first part, this is where we are now. It's formalizing the context. And then at some point, we'll go to the conceptualization and the encoding so that by December, we get a proper file. Let's say, as you've seen, an ontology is just a simple text file that we can deliver to the European Commission together with a report. So the idea is to start with existing knowledge graph and iteratively build. So we identified the data sources and had discussions on which one to start with. We also started identifying and analyzing these knowledge graphs and existing ontologies. And we started already to collect competency questions. So the file I'm going to share with you to work with, you already have some competency questions. So you can actually look at them. They have been reviewed, so they are valid questions. Again, the competency question is natural language. So you can use natural language to ask your question. And then we'll take these questions and then start identifying the concepts, try to convert them into Sparkle so that we can actually make the query upfront and then test if our ontology works. So these are the 4 main ontologies or knowledge graph we want to work with a modulo. GoTRIPLE is not yet a knowledge graph, right? But still, they are working on an ontology, so it's nice also to integrate that piece of work in the thinking so that we quickly integrate GoTRIPLE in there and make sure that we are compatible from start so that when it's becoming a knowledge graph, we can start making the Sparkle queries. And so the other resources that were identified are GESIS, Leibniz Institute of Social Science. They have a knowledge graph on social science survey with different types of data. OpenCitation, which contains citation information. Initially, we had Matilda as well, so we can still add Matilda in the loop. But when we started the work, Matilda was not online yet and not ready. So that's why we postponed this. And then we have OKRG. And interestingly enough, the 4 of them have a common point, which are publications, right? A lot of things are turning around publication, citation, analysis of the publication, and so on. So they have a core of common concepts already. Some of them are already perfectly aligned, some of them not. So we can easily start with something. So GESIS, you have, as I mentioned, if you look at the GESIS knowledge graph, you have publication, research data, which is about the methodology of the publication, sampling procedures, numbers of variables measured, and then you also have the survey variables that are linked so that you can access directly to social science survey data, and the instruments and tools, right? And it's based on a simple model. I mean, that's the high-level model where you have variables, you have scholarly article, instruments, and data sets, and you have a few relations, and you even have a relation that is schema citation that could make the link with OpenCitation. This is the ontology for GESIS, right? Showed in Protégé. So you have the link here. You can access the drive, and you can have the turtle file. And if you want to play with Protégé, you can just download. Protégé is an open source tool. You go to the Protégé website, you download the installer, and basically you can start running and uploading, importing the file, and then you will be able to visualize the architecture, the hierarchy and the relations. OKRG is another view on scientific publication. It's analysis of the scientific publications. So, of course, we have scientific research paper, therefore publication, and list of them. So we need to see now in these 2, GESIS and OKRG, how publication and the metadata about the publication is actually represented. Do you have authors, and are they modeled the same way, or they are slightly different? So we can start doing the mappings between them. You have research contribution using user-supplied metadata templates, basically describing additional information you add on top of the publication. You have comparisons, review, and benchmark. I'm going to the details. This is the model we found. So it's not necessarily a proper ontology on OKRG, like an old file. So this is what we extracted from, where did we get this diagram from, Yann? Do you remember? Okay, so it's from the paper describing OKRG development. Okay, thank you. And see, you have paper here. So in the other, it's going to be called publication. And in other, it's going to be called creative work. So that's the kind of nitty-gritty details we need to look into and say, okay, creative work is similar to this, or publication is a paper, and so on, which can be tricky. Open citation, it's citation and bibliographic reference. So initially, they had two knowledge graphs, one on the bibliographic reference, so basically the publications and the metadata associated with it, and then another one that contains the citations. Of course, there are information about author, venues, when it's published on conference, and so on. And then they have been working to actually harmonize the two knowledge graphs, and they have a proper ontology that is shown here. And basically, this is aligned with the SPAR ontology, right? So I don't remember exactly the SPAR, what it means, scientific publication. Oh, anyway. The most interesting thing in this work is that this alignment has been done with other knowledge graphs, including OpenAir. In the context of the RDA, there is an interest group or a working group that's called the Scientific Knowledge Graphs Interoperability Framework. And they have been working extensively on, okay, we get several databases that contain similar information. How do we connect them together? And that work led to the SKG-IF Ontology, where basically they started having this lightweight ontology I was talking about. Basically, this kind of work has been done already. So certainly it's going to be one of the ontology we want to work with initially to look at how they did, and if we can reuse that ontology as is for the whole social science and humanities. And that you can find that online, and they have you have it also in the GRAPHIA folder. And then there's GoTRIPLE, and then GoTRIPLE is also going through a change in the Atrium project, right, Luca? So basically, it's becoming now a real ontology. And so we have a lot of information like articles, bibliography, and different types of publications, blog posts, book parts, and so on. So that reflects this, of course, data sets. So basically, that makes a link between GESIS and GoTRIPLE, because GESIS also contains data sets, while OpenCitation doesn't and OKRG doesn't, right? So that's a good way for us to actually starting aligning at different levels the ontologies. However, as it's not yet a knowledge graph, we won't be able to test and benchmark the queries across these different knowledge graphs, but as soon as we have it, then we can actually do the testing, and that does not preclude us to actually integrate that into the process of the mapping process. Okay, and then there is a triple RDF file that you can find also on the shared drive if you want to use Protégé. So basically, this is what we need to do, is we get list of concepts in the 4 of them, and we need to start making links between them. Okay, publications. What kind of publications do we have in GESIS? Is this just scientific papers? Or do we have also blog posts, books, conference proceedings, and this kind of thing? So we need to look at the granularity level if the publications in GoTRIPLE are the same than the publication in GESIS, and if we need to extend GESIS or just specialize it. And so make a link, for instance, and say it's just publications here. In this case, it's just articles. And then in that case, we'll create a mapping that says that the GESIS publication concept, it's going to be the same as the article concept in GoTRIPLE, or equivalent, if we don't want to have a too strong connection. And the same goes for OKRG. These are scientific research papers. What kind of papers, right? Is this, again, just articles or more? And so we have bibliographic reference, research contributions, benchmark, reviews, and comparisons. Can we find an equivalent in the GoTRIPLE ontology and the others? Open citation is citation, so we saw that there are citations. Where do we have citations? I think it's GoTRIPLE. So we need to look in to start building these bridges. This is my slides on competency questions. So while part of the group is going to work on this mapping and starting identifying the best approach and trying to propose an initial framework and an initial ontology, then I would propose that those of you who are not interested in deep diving in the ontology world, that we start thinking about the competency questions and the questions we want to ask to these 4 graphs, right? Because they are connected, and there are some questions already there, so that we don't go too far, and these are things we can immediately test for the release of the first version. And in the meantime, if you're associated with your own, if you have your own knowledge graph and you're interested, then try to see if you have connections between 1 or 2 of these graphs that I just mentioned and your own graph, and see what are the queries you'd like to make across these graphs. There's some pitfalls. So in terms of natural language, we propose that you don't do any kind of questions. You have to restrict yourself to things that are not vague, right? So you need to be quite clear on the question. So the how-to questions, that's not going to work. How do I apply? This is the example. How do I apply for promotion to full professor? That's not gonna, it's not a query you do to LLMs. It's a Sparkle queries. So basically it's not going to be easy to do. So we have to reformulate. Things with vague concept, how popular is a software. There's no way for a graph to quantify popularity unless there is a popularity index. So in that case, we can do that. But yeah, the question is, what is popularity and how is it quantified? And lack of precisions, to what extent does this corresponds to that and so on. There are people working on competency questions. We recently uncovered there is a repository of ontology competency questions. So if you want sources of inspiration, you can go there. It's quite limited, but already it's a good start. And they even have a tool to actually do this. Yes.
Thank you, Yann. Just so, does it mean, based on the pitfalls you mentioned, that the question we should ask should only the answer to this question should always be very precise with an object to name or a list of objects? Because or a count, but yes, but that means there is no sentence, no. It's just you need to answer by the object and or list of these, but that's all. This is how we can shape the question. Then, yeah.
So the question remains natural language, so you can have a proper question, but then you need to think about the answer you want to get. So you would get, for instance, a list of authors, a list of DOIs, this kind of thing. So that helps framing the question as well. And then we need to have this information because when we run the Sparkle query, we really need to know what we are expecting to get, right? So that we can immediately check and say, okay, it's not the right information. So basically, if we get the authors instead of the DOI, we get something wrong, right? And also it forces you to start thinking about the knowledge graph itself and the content of the knowledge graph. So that's actually useful for this kind of exercise. And you will see we have a table where basically there are different columns. So one thing we ask is when you create a competency question, just put your name. If it's not perfect, that's fine. But then when we start looking at your question, we know who to ask. And then maybe you can explain us what you wanted to say or what kind of query you want to make, and we can reformulate the question so that it becomes usable for us. Also, when you have a column that actually lists the types of knowledge graph you are targeting with that question. So if you have a transversal question between GESIS and OpenCitation, for instance, then it's good to put that there so we know which graph are targeted. And if you have your own, so we have an initial list of graphs, but in the comment section, you can add another graph you would like to use. Any questions It's clear for everyone? You're ready to work? I feel everybody low in energy. We're reaching toward the end of the day. So, okay, so for the group, we have this, for the group one, so just a reminder of what we expect. We don't want queries just for one graph. This is not what we want, because the GRAPHIA knowledge graph covers multiple graphs. So we want queries that connect 1, 2, 3, 4, as many as you want, graphs. So we have this spreadsheet. You have the link here. So anyone in the room or online can just go to this spreadsheet. There are already, so it's a copy of our working document. So you can screw that document over if you need. I don't care. The data is safe for us. But then you have all these queries that are useful for examples. So don't restrict yourself. Be creative, right? And then we'll reevaluate these questions and the possibility to answer these questions. And again, if you put your name, then we can go back to you and say, we don't really understand what you mean there. Can you be more specific? And then we can work out the details and then refine the questions and update it into our list. And then we'll start working on prioritizing the different questions, competency questions. Maybe focus on the 10 first that are easily doable, so that we can start with an iterative process. We start with the 10 first, and then the 10 following, and each time we upgrade the ontologies to actually cover these cases. And each time we have a version, we'll validate the 10 questions with the Sparkle query, so we make sure we get the right results, and we can demonstrate that it works. For the other group, the hardcore ontologies, technical people that really want to discuss how to build an ontology. Well, there's the second group. So you have different ways. So that group is going to be led by Asia. Asia, she's a senior ontologist in the biomedical domain. So she's an ontology ninja. She's going to do things you don't even know you can do. But yeah, so she knows all the things, so she can drive the discussions. So maybe if you can find a spot, or either just go to Asia if you want to work on the ontology, so that actually you can start this discussion. And I will be here for the competency questions. So maybe we can have, what time is it now? It's 4:40. So we can say we can have a first round of 20 minutes. You work on your side, start thinking about competency questions. I think you have the list of the resources. So basically you can start working, but if you have any questions, I can go and talk to you, or I can do it as a group. Should we start?